We hope to be able to go back to the markets next year. We do go back to the markets every month, as you know, with the short-term treasury bills. But depending on how the general situation evolves, and of course how successful we are with our own program, we hope to be back in 2012.
Does that mean we can rule out a return to the markets in 2011? Because you've sort of left the door open.
Indeed, we're not closing that door. We have announced that once we finish with the procedures that are necessary, we'll be rolling out a diaspora bond. That's a particular type, of course, of particular way of coming out of the market, not your usual way. If situation improves before the end of 2011, we might give it a crack then. But it's all up to the market conditions.
What's your sense of what kind of appetite you're getting for that diaspora bond?
It's too early to tell, and we're waiting for the full SEC clearance for the U.S. market before we can actually come out and say more specific things about that.
What's the budget deficit for 2010 going to settle at?
Well, Eurostat will announce this at the end of the month. We're waiting to see what the final figures will be. You know that the recession was actually deeper than what we originally thought when we projected the 9.4% deficit, so we'll be higher than that. We'll see what the final figures show, but in any case, I think it's important to note what a remarkable reduction in the deficit was achieved in 2010. Wherever the number settles, it will have been an unprecedented reduction in the deficit.
How is this year going?
The first 2 months, actually, despite the fact that we've had some lag in revenues, we are ahead of the target in terms of deficit reduction.
This is the 50 million euros that you've talked about for the months of January and February.
50 million euros ahead of the reduction of the deficit target. And we believe that the problems with revenues are not going to continue in the rest of the year. They had to do with specificities in the first couple of months. The fact that certain payments were done in January and around December, like the years before. They had to do, of course, with the fact that the last quarter of 2010 was a particularly bad quarter. It was the worst quarter in the recession. I think after that, we've begun the upturn. It's slow, but we're getting there.
Isn't it the case that a lot of that 50 million euros that you're talking about, or that you're above target on, is basically because of cuts in public expenditure, and that when it comes to revenue and spending, you're actually not meeting the targets?
As I said, we're lagging behind the target in terms of revenues, but last year we were also
and above the target in terms of spending. In other words, you're
last year we were
overspending.
also lagging in revenues. In the end of the year, we had a very good result. So we're not worried about reaching the target that we have set.
Your real estate program, if we could call it that, your plan to sell government property and raise in the process, whether it's a lease or freehold arrangement, 50 billion euros over the next few years.
5 years.
Over the next 5 years. Is that a realistic target? Can you really raise that much?
Yeah, it is. It's a 50 billion program over the next 5 years. It's privatizations and real estate development. It's an interim target of 15 billion by 2013. We'll be announcing during the month of April the specific set of all the companies that will be privatized. We've already started, the gas company, for example, the extension of the lease on the Athens airport, the state lottery program. There's other companies behind that, regional airports, regional ports, corporatizing them, bringing in strategic investors. So from the corporate entities alone, we believe we can top 10 billion. And then you have the real estate program. I'm talking about the first 3 years, which will be the rest. And that's a vast program because the holdings of the Greek state of interesting properties that could be developed is very large.
But you don't want to sell that land outright. You're talking about leases on the land,
We'll
right?
do a combination. It depends on the type of asset, and depends, of course, if it's buildings, we're talking about outright sales. If it's large tracts of land that have a particular value, investors themselves who come and talk to us at the moment talk more about long-term leases rather than outright sales. So we'll be flexible.
You really think that there would be an appetite? Because obviously there's been some suggestions that private investors wouldn't be interested in land sales when the land wasn't sold outright, because of course then they wouldn't be able to sell the properties on that land. as freehold?
It depends on the kind of property. For the time being, the kind of interest that we've been getting is consistent with what we've been saying. And again, we will be flexible and adapt to also investor interest. Part of those holdings, of course, will be part of an entity, a corporate entity, an SPV, that will be able to bring the values up front.
Are you concerned that the capital cuts that you're making are going to have consequences for longer-term growth?
We're actually convinced that the reforms that we're making will have positive consequences for long-term growth, because everything we're doing around labor market reform, opening up closed professions, opening up sectors of the economy, freeing bureaucracy, a fast-track process for investment, all these increase the growth potential of the country.
And your forecast for 2011 is a 3% contraction?
That's right.
Do you still believe that that's realistic?
Yes. I would say there could be a surprise on the upside, but it's very hard to tell at this point. We've had 4 consecutive months in which exports have been growing between 25 and 40%. And this is not one sector driving it, but this is a horizontal. It's across sectors increase in exports, which is very positive. It shows that Greek entrepreneurs are moving to new markets and they're managing to find them, and that's very good, because it changes the productive form of the economy. We're moving to a more export-oriented, investment-led recovery.
If there is a shortfall when it comes to reaching your target for the budget deficit for last year, you've indicated that it's going to be higher than you originally thought. What does that mean for the budget of 2011?
We're sticking to the targets that we've set.
Sticking to the targets. But if you don't reach that budget deficit, if it's above the budget deficit, which you've already said, then that means that there's a shortfall, right?
Indeed. Which
what, a billion euros? How much are we talking about?
Well, we'll see. It means that we'll have to cover that shortfall. And in a situation where what you control the most as a government, of course, is your expenditures. So most of that shortfall will have to be covered by some restraint in expenditures.
Can you unequivocally rule out a restructuring of Greek debt?
Absolutely. And I'm not the only one that is unequivocally ruling it out. The entire EU is doing so, all the EU institutions and all the EU countries. We have said that this is not going to happen.
Having gone to the European Union for assistance, do you think it would make sense for Portugal to do the same, if you could put yourself in their shoes?
I would never try to put myself in somebody else's shoes. I think Portugal has been very brave to announce a program, a 3-year program of measures to bring its deficit under control, and I sincerely hope that they can bring this through without having to get into a program.
Being on the receiving end, going forward, and this is an academic question, what would you recommend to the international community? What has the international community gotten wrong in the way it's helped Greece that it should not repeat in the future?
I think we've all learned that speed is of the essence in terms of how you respond to crisis, and we've all learned that you have to be ahead of the market. All too often we've been behind the curve. We've been reacting rather than being proactive. I think that's a general lesson that we all need to keep.